Mob friends! Tonight I'm gonna test your attention spans because this video is gonna be intense. Remember this Pacific P16 from the last time? This is him now. Feel old yet? My ideal model would be one that you can paint as a single piece. No sub-assemblies and separate pieces. But, well, it is what it is. First of all, I washed the parts in soapy water because the truck collected a lot of dust as I was building it. Right now, I'm pressure washing it with isopropyl alcohol because soap doesn't always dissolve the grease on the surface, and after this point, I won't touch the model with my bare hands. Another invisible yet important step is to give the large shiny parts a good coat of VMS metal prep for better paint adherence. Next up, we need to prime the whole thing. This new yellow VMS primer is a great choice because that's the primary color of the truck. It's gonna be a year since I started using these acrylic primers, and I couldn't be happier. Maybe they don't spray as smoothly as Mr. Surfacer diluted with Mr. Leveling Thinner, but they make up for that with excellent self-leveling capabilities, and they have perfect coverage. So far, I always sprayed them undiluted straight from the bottle, and the key is to apply them wet. No thin, misty coats, but a good hosing. So now, with everything primed, we can figure out the official Pacific truck colorway. Turns out, they must have been using Syrian Republican Guard Desert Yellow in Canada in the 70s, because from all the paints I have, this is the closest match. Of course, I'm all about pale and light colors, so I added a bit of white into it, a little bit of gloss varnish for saturation, and diluted it down with Mr. Leveling Thinner. Something was telling me that this would be a long spraying session, so I stored the mixture in a dropper bottle, and after a few tests, I decided to add a bit of red as well. Lock and load, fellas. I suppose the only disadvantage of colored primers is when you're a content creator. The difference between the primed and painted model isn't as striking as with standard gray or black primer. But on the other hand, this approach will save you some time and lots of paint because you don't have to apply as many layers to get a good coverage. Let's just wrap this boring segment by saying that it took me a couple of hours to airbrush the base color. With that out of the way, I'll do something unorthodox. Apply raw metal color in specific areas with lots of wear. Normally, we apply these rust tones as the initial layer, and then apply the chipping fluid and then the top coat. But with an extensive model like this, I decided to be more efficient, and instead of spraying the whole truck in a rusty tone, I only applied it in selected areas where lots of chipping will be present. Basically, everything behind the cap protector. Next, I applied the chipping fluid. Remember that I added a bit of gloss varnish into the yellow paint. That will make the chipping more difficult, so I added extra thick layers of chipping fluid and left it to fully dry. Then I reapplied the yellow coat and adjusted its intensity depending on the amount of wear I saw in reference images. Check it out, the center of the cap protector has a very thin layer, and the paint goes down immediately. This is probably where logs often scrape against the metal. I mean, it's proof that the cap protector is doing its job. You'll see me alternating between different brushes, and small, stiff ones are excellent for chipped edges. I decided to replicate reality as closely as I could, so I didn't chip everything equally. In fact, I left many areas without any chipping. I sprayed the different parts individually, because if you cover up all your chipping fluid with paint and the chipping job takes you way longer than it should, or if you have to leave your workbench, the paint will start to harden and bite down, making it extremely difficult to remove. This way, I was always working with relatively fresh paint and time wasn't playing against me. Still, extensive chipping can be quite exhausting, and if you start losing focus, the result will suffer as well. This happened to me in multiple areas of the model, but luckily it was still pretty authentic. And I actually have an extremely cool trick up my sleeve. But first, here's the truck with hairspray chipping out of the way. Pretty gnarly, huh? And the yellow looks a little bit different. Did you notice that? That's because I applied an orange filter. Inks from AK Interactive are really intense, so I diluted it like 1 drop of ink and 15 drops of tap water. The color still wasn't quite the same as in my references, although each truck these days has been refurbished, so the paints are not authentic in real life either, but now I like the result a lot more. Okay, let's get back to the chipping. Look at the log carrier fork and check out how the chipping here is way more refined. That's what we're gonna do next. And the trick is all about thick, undiluted acrylic paints and a stippling sponge. I recently bought a few packs of sponges in an art store, and if you've known me for a long time, you'll know that I never fussed too much about my tools. A kitchen sponge or some packaging foam was more than enough for me. But I have to be honest with you here, this artsy-fartsy sponge is so much better. This whole process was extremely chill and low pressure. I remember that Mike Rinaldi talks about the same approach in one of his tank art books. Basically, if you have already reached the limits of your hairspray chipping, you can always use the result as a basis for additional effects painted with a sponge. And the sponge method also has multiple different techniques to it. In some places, I unloaded almost all of the paint on a napkin and basically dry brushed the surface. In other cases, the paint was still unloaded, but not as much, and it was all about the usual stippling. I remember how the cap protector looked just a while ago. It was a pretty sad sight compared to now. So much depth and so many tiny rust chips. Speaking of depth, I'm not using 3 different paints just to act fancy. Dark gray is awesome for freshly exposed or polished steel. A red brown from AK is a wonderful universal rusty chipping color, and black and umber from Life Color is like top tier for really dark, old chips. I'm gonna repeat myself, but even as I'm editing this video and remembering the process, it's just a really fun, no-stress method. Especially compared to hairspray chipping, where you always have that subtle feeling that you're racing against time. I did barely any chipping with a paintbrush, but since I had the gray paint on my palette, I went ahead and painted the steel ropes and other metal details. So what do you think? Not bad for a start. This model is gonna have 2 different finishes, and so far we've been working on the first one. Let me show you. The front section of the truck is gonna be almost pristine compared to the rest, and this is where we'll need some masking as well. For the green Pacific paint, I mixed a dark green with a touch of blue. I didn't film any of the masking because it's my least favorite task on scale models, and after I was done, I felt like the green was too dark, so I lightened it up with Deck 10 and added some subtle post shading. For the white section of the cap, I mixed an off-white color and applied it heavily diluted. Thin paints and masking tape probably don't do well together, but you don't have too many other options when you're spraying white. One thing is for sure, removing the masking tape is much more exciting than applying it, and you can experience a whole range of emotions. Excitement from the result and dread when you find some underspray. But hey, I don't give a flying feather, so I freehanded some corrections with the airbrush, and when that wasn't enough, I simply used off-white acrylic and fixed the remaining parts with the paintbrush. Is it the correct way? Definitely not, but it gets the job done, and that's what these trucks were all about. So with the official Pacific colorway done, we can make the truck even more colorful with all the different details. Let me show you this sort of textured base coating I keep using more and more on large pieces. It's something I use quite often on facades and architectural models in general. Instead of painting something in a single color, you stipple a couple of similar tones, usually a light one and a dark one, without any rhyme or reason. It doesn't have to be delicate or refined at all, because depending on our needs, the effect can be toned down and unified with a few glazes of the same color we used for the first layer. It's not necessary on every part, but it makes the model much prettier in my opinion. The engine is a very complex piece, so my options were quite limited here, but Green Sky is almost a perfect match for the original paint used by Detroit Diesel. Some basic stippling to make it more interesting, but a much better example will be the cab floor. These rubber mats will be quite filthy, but the stippling technique doesn't take much time, and if you have that option to add some visual texture, then definitely give it a try. The anti-slip surface also looks really cool, and you'll see how much weathering we'll be able to put into these, but later. The truck also has lots of shiny parts, and I originally painted them with silver acrylic. But then, it also has a lot of chrome parts. Brushing the lacquer-based super chrome from AK requires a light touch, otherwise you'll start melting the paint underneath. But it looks really good, so I later repainted every shiny part with this magic concoction. Interestingly, I can get a shinier effect with brushes than with airbrushing. You can get all of these amazing AK paints through the affiliate link in the video description, and even a small discount if you use my sales coupon. And it's not just about acrylic paints, but weathering products as well. Speaking of which, let's give the model a pin wash. We'll need 3 different washes, but don't worry, this only applies to the cap. 3 strikingly different surfaces need 3 different washes, otherwise the result will be too uniform and either too strong on the white or too weak on the dark green. So a grey wash on the white, German yellow wash on the yellow, and dark umber on the green. The model was looking good in its base colors, but it had that pristine die-cast look. Suddenly, the cap looks much better. It has that HDR look, but we'll tone some of it down later. The only other part where I applied the dark umber wash was the bonnet, and we won't even touch this part again until much later in the video when we're applying dust effects. The rest of the model was treated with the wash for German dark yellow vehicles. If you apply it slightly heavier, it has that subtle grimy look, and it's excellent on the engine. And bringing out all these little details to life was amazing. And we haven't even painted most of them yet, it's just wash. The effect takes a whole new dimension on worn surfaces because here, things were already pretty busy. Essentially, when you combine hairspray chipping with a pin wash, you'll get nicely beaten and filthy surface. What's there not to like? Of course, a lot of this won't be visible in the end because of the earth effects, but I didn't want to cut any corners on this project. So, what do you say now? Doesn't look like a die-cast toy car from a gas station store anymore, so that's a plus. The front section still needs a ton of work, but when we look at the rear parts, those already look quite the part. The cap protector, really nice, and the trailer, even cooler in my opinion. Let's now get cozy for a moment and paint the cabin interior. I started with the dashboard because this is the most detailed part of the cab, and it's pretty huge. You'll see that I implemented a similar textured approach like on the exterior details, but instead of sponges, I used brushes, acrylic washes, and lots of small scuffs. I was expecting that most of the work will be barely visible through the windows, so my painting was a bit more expressive, and I wasn't afraid to use a black enamel wash for the outlining. There are no decals for this 3D printed model, so I painted the dials by hand, and here we can appreciate the reflective qualities of the AK Super Chrome. Glossy acrylic varnish from VMS was applied as a glass on the dials, and I also added a lot of chipping with a silver acrylic paint. It's an artistic choice for sure because it contrasts with the dark gray, but luckily it's also visible in references. Drivers have all kinds of notepads and other papers on the dash, but again, no decals for these niche items, so I used my carefree brush scribble technique for these. I was surprised that this whole panel gets quite dirty in real life, and applying enamel earth effects on a vintage dashboard definitely wasn't on my 2026 bingo card, but then again, we live in 2026. Enough said. Well, that wasn't so bad, was it? Let's now use some figure painting techniques on the padded walls. This is one of the reasons I would totally love to take a ride in this truck. Nature whenever you look, screaming Detroit engine, TikTok on my phone thanks to the Starlink panel on the bonnet, and these cozy, warm, soft padded walls. My approach was to apply the base color first and then make it darker with diluted glazes. Apply some enamel pin washes around surface details like door handles and rivets, and then bring back that lightness with the base color again, while also creating a fake 3-dimensional effect. Not even a year ago I would be doing all of this with watered down acrylics, but I finally understand why dedicated contrast paints and acrylic washes are such a big deal amongst miniature painters. They're just so much better and do their job perfectly. And most importantly, they're a huge time saver. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the cozy cabin, and I'm glad it was designed like this. It clicks together like two puzzle pieces. Let's now deal with the most dreadful part of the process, windshields. I did my research and prepped for this task in advance. I always thought that acetate foil is all you'll ever need for nice windows, but once I saw through these acrylic AK sheets, I couldn't believe my eyes. Now, fair warning, they're acrylic, not your standard polystyrene, so when you're cutting them, they can be brittle and crack. The 3D printed window parts are great cutting templates, but the only way to get a perfect shape and size is with careful sanding and constant dry fitting. Now, how are we gonna glue them in place without making a huge mess? With the magicest of all magic potions of all time, VMS Transpafix. It's a perfectly clear, super tacky glue that dries pretty slowly, and what's best, it can be dissolved and completely wiped away with VMS Universal Weathering Carrier Light Type. It took me a few windows before I understood the workflow, so to save you some time, here's what I found. The glue takes a long time to dry, like a lot of time. As such, I stipulate with a brush, then add the clear window part, and if needed, flood the corners with more glue acting as a filler. And then I set it aside for a good hour or so. By that time, the glue has created a strong bond. It's also dry to the touch, but you can still safely wipe it away without breaking the bond. This must be the most life-changing product VMS has ever created, especially when you're an aircraft or a car modeler. So if you're convinced, visit the links below and use my discount codes to get anything from them at a better price. The result of clear acrylic sheet and Transpafix is a glass so clear it's almost invisible unless it reflects light at your face. So let's now close the cabin. I quickly painted the seats and tried to add some variation between them, although my options were quite limited. And I also added a fair amount of silver metallic chipping on the doors. As I foreshadowed earlier, the floor and rubber mats got completely covered with earth effects, and with that, I could glue the cabin in place. My videos don't have the highest dynamic range, but if you can see this much through the windows here, imagine how much is visible with the naked eye. And now, let's paint the coolest part of the truck. The pin wash already did a lot of heavy lifting, and I also painted some of the metal pieces made from aluminum. So again, a lot of detail painting awaits us. I noticed some dark rusty chips in references, and I took a similar approach with every bolt. I just chipped them with a shiny silver color instead. I used the same paint to highlight the contours of hydraulic sockets. And that includes these small hydraulic valves and metal straps or cable ties or whatever they're called. The most satisfying and enjoyable job was hands down painting the individual cables and hoses. Once again, I followed references, but also took a few liberties. I didn't want them to turn into a gray mass, so I made them more colorful than on the real one. But then again, some of these are actual garden hoses on my reference truck, so I don't think you can go wrong here. Besides, even electric cables are not only white or black anymore. Painting some of these was quite difficult because of the tight conditions, but I wasn't this much satisfied in a long time. Now it was all about adding the weathering effects. I started with subtle rust tones made from oil paints, just to give these areas a warmer tone and break up the bright green surface a little further. Then I added earth effects made from enamel weathering products mixed with dry pigments. I'll show you the exact colors later. Once again, I tried to replicate what I saw in references as closely as possible. I also applied this mixture on the cables, very subtly of course, and now they won't look so brand new, but we'll still be able to appreciate the detail painting on each one of them. I did the same weathering on the thick air tubes. These seem to be a combination of straight metal sections and curved plastic segments, and they're covered with thick layers of dust. The shiny clamps holding them together provide beautiful contrast, and the engine compartment would look quite empty without them, simply because they're so chunky. So what do you think now? If my memory serves me well, this is the first engine I've painted on the channel, right? I'll keep the bonnet removable, but even with it, we can appreciate the engine from the sides. These large parabolic headlights I designed for the kit look absolutely amazing with the AK Super Chrome. I painted the bulbs with clear yellow to distinguish them from the rest, and for the clear parts I used my old trick. Acetate foil and a household grade punch and die set. By household, I mean that you won't buy it in a modeling store, but rather in a hardware and tool shop. I managed to put them in place with limited success. I don't know, but some of them don't sit quite flush. I only noticed the mistake once I flooded them with clear varnish, which holds them in place. Realizing there's nothing much I can do at this point, I proceeded to paint the plastic ring around them and, as usual, gave them a dark wash for some visual depth. Next up, for whatever reason, the radiator cover is absolutely chopped on the real truck. The amount of wear on the front bumpers is a matter of personal taste. I've seen photos with completely rusted out bumpers, but also trucks that didn't hit a single rock on their journeys. So I went with something in between, and realized that you can do a lot with just a sponge and some blended oil paints. So that's the front finished. Let's move on. I needed a break from chipping, so I quickly painted the remaining cables on the tractor. These were amongst the first details I added when I started building the model, so getting them all painted felt like the end of a very important chapter. Rested and refreshed, I added more chips according to references. Some heavy dry brushing with silver on the driver's steps for the obligatory contrast on black surfaces, and I was quite surprised to find some serious chipping on the air filters. Here I resorted to my favorite chipping paintbrush from 502 Abteilung. And with chipping out of the way, I also finished the detail painting on the trailer. My idea was to paint hydraulic lines and electrics with grey and coolant hoses for the brakes with red, because I glimpsed something like that in one reference. Looks very cool and very civilian. But then, something happened. My paint holder wasn't tightened properly because I was rotating it all over the place while painting the cables, and the model just took a tumble on my workbench. My first thought was, why wasn't the camera rolling? And my second thought, no, God! But I managed to fix every broken piece and move forward. Another scary part for me were the exhausts. These are shiny and chrome, or at least they used to be, but now they're dull and grimy. So how do you replicate something like that if you've never done it before? Well, I started with the white base coat followed with silver. Turns out, metallic paints are quite difficult to brush on large surfaces, and I had to reopen almost every hole on the perforated shields. Then I gave them that dull, greyish patina with an enamel wash applied all over the surface. My brain has been fried by Instagram reels, so I didn't wait for the wash to fully cure and proceeded with another round, this time with dark umber around details. The washes were mixing with each other, and that was no good, so I had to look for an alternative solution if I wanted to finish them in one session. Luckily, AK acrylic washes are the right tool for the job because they behave like regular enamel washes, but dry quickly, and once they're dry, they're not going anywhere. So Black Knight was applied over the perforated shields to enhance shadows and that grimy, sooty look, and Rust Wash was heavily employed on the pipes. I wasn't quite sure if the effect was gonna be good enough on its own, but after I layered these two over each other, the result was absolutely spot on. And I must say, a dull metallic exhaust with these rusty and grimy stains, it's a match made in heaven. Absolute eye candy. And it's so easy, seriously. I was worried about painting these because they're tucked behind some fragile pieces, and I was like, well, how am I gonna reach these with a sponge and whatnot? Only to realize that the pipes needed just these two types of acrylic wash, and that was it. If you thought this was crazy, then check this out. Using still water on a scale model wasn't on my 2026 bingo card either, and after this, I'll be probably ready for anything this year has in store for me. The LED lights are not excellent, but I think they're serviceable. The heat shields on the exhaust could have been better, but the heat-corroded pipes are everything I was hoping for. Time to blow my own trumpet for a moment, because I can hear you asking who's the handsome boy who textured these planks using alpha brushes in Blender. And I'll happily tell you because it was I, yours truly. This is my only contribution to the Pacific P16 model from Aladdin Model, apart from my constant nitpicking and, well, actually, each time Gopal, the author of the model, sent me an update. Okay, I made the small pack of alternative/detail parts for the model, and those are available on the Aladdin website as a free item if you purchase the Pacific, and I think it's only fair to give them one more shout out because this model is a collaboration between us. Steve from Aladdin Model has been offering me a collab for a few years. I could pick any model and they would make it for me, but I didn't have any ideas until I fell in love with the P16 in SnowRunner. So if it weren't for them and their generosity, this model wouldn't even exist. So please, if you're interested in 3D printed models, check out their website because they have tons of awesome stuff there, including figures, conversions, detail sets, and they also hold annual 3D modeling competitions. The most recent one finished not so long ago, and I was a part of the judging panel there. And also, you can vote for any type of model you want them to make. While I was saying all those fancy words, you probably noticed that the process of aging wood is not difficult at all. If you're still not convinced by my doomsday prepper level commitment to this project, let me shatter your doubts with this roll of self-adhesive mirror foil I bought on AliExpress, which will probably last me for the rest of my life and the rest of my children's and grandchildren's lives if they build trucks as frequently as I do. I can confidently say that the mirror foil is indeed doing what mirrors should do. The only downside is its thickness. You can see that it sort of stands out on the mirrors, which sucks, but listen, it sleeps better than faking the mirror surface with chrome paint. You can see the reflection of air filters in them, and you can even see them reflected in the window. Mission accomplished. Are you feeling exhausted yet? Too bad, because we already painted the exhaust. Now we need to paint the wheels. These are quite colorful as well. Again, I followed my references, and we already went through a few painting steps that objectively sucked on this model, but nothing beats the suck factor of painting diluted white acrylic on a satin dark yellow surface. So I used an airbrush to make my life easier. I'm telling you, I'll go to the end of the world and back just to avoid masking. Big wheels mean big work, and I pretty much repeated every single weathering step on them. Chipping with a sponge, 2 different pin washes, dark yellow wash as the basic washing, and dark sepia for extra deep shadows and dirt accumulations. And, of course, rust effects made with oil paints. While I was painting these, look who was giving me an authentic soundtrack. A real-life lumberjack right outside my window. I saw it as a sign that this logging truck will be a great success, and proceeded to paint the tires. Here I have my standard and simple workflow. Start with a dark gray base coat. Ideally something with a warm hue like ash gray. Ironically, rubber black is too dark for my taste. And then I give them a heavy wash with a lighter, diluted gray. Again, something warm like graphite. This gives them that clean, slightly dusty look of factory fresh tires, ready for earth effects. But not yet, although we're close, I promise. Before we start adding dust and mud, we need to wrap up the chipping with some additional rust effects made with oil paints. Here I have a standard palette as well. Oxide patina and dark rust from 502 Abteilung. Now, honestly speaking, my reference trucks were heavily chipped, but not really rusty, like anywhere. So this is definitely an artistic liberty, however, I believe it was a good choice because it helped to somewhat blend the chipping into the paint job, and it also enhanced that reddish hue of the yellow base color. Remember how I applied an orange filter over the model in the beginning? This is the same thing, just more focused. Of course, there are places where the effect is 100% justified, such as the ring under the log carrier, the steel ropes, and the bolts holding the wooden planks. Yeah, I believe those are bolts, not nails. So by now you probably see the point of the method, so I won't dwell on it any longer. Here's how the model looks fully painted up and ready for weathering. My soon-to-be wife, Mrs. Shift, said I should keep it like this and say it just went through a car wash. But I suspect her real intention was for me to be finally done with it and move on to a new model. So naturally, let's get it completely covered in mud. As usual, the first concoction is acrylic mud paste. This step is all about establishing basic volume and texture in the most prominent areas. Luckily, reference images told me exactly where I should apply it, and surprisingly, it wasn't much. Just some tight places around the wheels and on the chassis, but other than that, zilch. This is another bit of visual storytelling because if you imagine the truck with the wheels attached, the piles of earth are only in places where they would be thrown by the spinning wheels, or should I say, spin tires. Obligatory like and comment if you got that reference. Okay, I wasn't telling the full truth when I said there was no more earth anywhere else, but these piles have visibly different texture, and the earth looks more loose. So I did just that. Sifted gardening substrate held in place by VMS ballast freeze. This is more the result of mud falling from the tree logs, and yes, we'll add the tree bark as well, just be patient. The next step is, as always, pre-dusting with an airbrush. But this is so important, and it was never importanter than on this model. You see, the dust and dry mud on the real trucks is almost grey, and it contrasts beautifully with the yellow paint. Also, a lot of the transitions between dirt and paint are very smooth, almost like they were airbrushed. So this step alone ticks a lot of boxes, but the most important ones are the usual. It creates a baseline for enamel weathering, adds a strong, opaque, matte foundation, and shifts the color of the acrylic paste and real soil to wherever we need it to be. Also, when you're working with enamels, you always have the option to wipe them away and keep the weathering more subtle. But once you apply the pre-dusting with an airbrush, there's no going back. So it's good to not overthink it and just go with the flow, especially when the model has to be really filthy. If you think I'm contradicting everything I've been saying for years, don't hold it against me. I lost my mind from pure ecstasy on this project. This was also the second time when the model left its improvised styrofoam clamps in the octopus painting stand. The first roll was involuntary, and this time I took every possible safety precaution, meaning I held it with one hand while it was balancing on its cap on a piece of sponge. Does it look better? I think it definitely does. And it's only pre-dusting. Let's now mix those earth tones from enamels and pigments. First off, a dry mud tone / dust color. About 60% enamel and 40% pigment. I decided to start with the wheels because I was excited to see them finished. I also had a plan here, to make the wheels on the truck more weathered than the ones on the trailer. It's a small detail I observed in references, and it makes sense depending on the situation. When the truck goes down the mountain and starts driving on paved roads, the wheels become cleaner. Then, once it unloads the cargo, the trailer gets packed and it drives back up the mountain on dirt roads. And naturally, the wheels on the truck get muddy again, but not the trailer wheels. Those only get filthy on the way down again when the truck is loaded. So on the truck wheels, my application was much heavier and the layers of earth are more opaque. While on the trailer, the mixture was applied more like a wash. I'm gonna jump ahead and apply the dark mud tones as well, but we'll talk more about these on the truck itself. Basically, the tire pattern is covered with darker mud, especially when the ground isn't soggy and soft. The logging roads in the Pacific Northwest are frequently maintained for safety reasons, and you won't find too many ruts or deep puddles in them. As such, the surface is quite hard, often reinforced by gravel, and unless it's absolutely pouring outside, the wheels won't get too muddy. But still, you can see the different weathering on them. The truck wheels received some blended mud tones, as well as a wash in the tire pattern, and they are generally much darker. Applying the thick undiluted paint mixture with a sponge is the coolest method because it leaves some of those small, random stains of dried mud here and there. So with the wheels finished, we have a pretty good visual aid for the rest of the weathering. I actually went ahead and did some more painting off screen for a couple of evenings and finished the trailer to see how those special effects stack up. Let's now achieve the same result on the tractor. And let me get one thing out of the way first. References. Just like everything else on this model, I simply tried replicating what I saw in real life. Now I'll tell you about those enamel pigment mixtures. If you've been watching me for a while, You already know that I'm strongly against pigments, especially when they're used as the only weathering solution. They're unpredictable, hard to fix, and extremely messy to work with, and I hate messy jobs. But if you use them as additive with enamel paints, it's a completely different story. Understandably, it's not a messy job anymore, and cool things start to happen when you mix these two together. We all know that even the best enamel paints are not 100% reliable all the time, and the older they get, the more they deteriorate. And suddenly, you find that your enamel dust zone has glossy stains on it, even though it's been dry for over a day. Well, guess what? That's not the case anymore here, because pigments ensure the paint dries to a completely dead flat finish each and every time. It doesn't give the mixture any volume, but it still adds a bit of microscopic texture that makes a world of difference. Basically, it turns it from an earth-colored paint into something that looks like real earth, just scaled down. Words don't do it justice, but the difference is really noticeable. And the blending is also different. The paint simply behaves more, I don't know, messy. It's actually possible to blend the results further using a stiff, dry brush, and the overall drying time is much longer, like I kept the effect to fully cure for a day before it was safe to proceed with the next layers. At the first glance, not much has changed since the pre-dusting layer, but after a second look, things changed a lot, didn't they? So let's now make the wet mud, mixed with the same light grayish pigment. Should I say that I, once again, followed references? I know it must be annoying by this point, but it's just true. The rotation of the wheels splashes the mud in pretty interesting patterns, and in some places, it's clear the mud was brought there by foot traffic. I actually used two trucks in very different situations as inspiration for this. One was my main reference for most of the details and special effects, and the second one was less beaten up, but muddier because it was operating in the rain. I didn't like how the wheels looked like completely covered in wet mud on the second truck, but I liked the wet stains of mud everywhere else. By now you might have noticed all the different blending techniques I've been using. Stippling and circular motion on horizontal surfaces, but on vertical, things get more interesting. Sometimes I was swiping the brush up and down per usual, sometimes I was dragging the paint up, and sometimes I only pushed it down. Basically, if you want streaking effects, you drag it up, and when you want a sharply defined border, you swipe down. And in some cases, in really tight areas where I couldn't do this swiping motion, I just pushed the paint. This method is absolutely devastating for the paintbrush bristles, but sometimes you just don't have any other option. By the way, check out my website where you'll find photos of my models, and most of them are for sale. Or should I say they are sold already, but there are still a few left. And I also have merch, so check it out as well if you want to represent. The cap protector was a special case because in real life there were large, clearly defined stains, but something was telling me I didn't have the skill set to pull them off faithfully and aesthetically. So I resorted to more streaking effects, really subtle mind you, and blended the effect with diluted speckling. Okay, so that's another step done, and the truck is starting to look the part. I promised you some tree bark earlier, and now it's finally time to deliver on that promise. I decided to use real tree bark, but I couldn't figure out a way to grind it into small particles. I found that slowly scraping it away was the best method, and I could obtain small pieces as well as long stripes, just like in real life. Its placement and amount is once again based on references, but this stuff is unlike anything else I've tried to glue to my models in the past. It acts as if it has negative weight. You can't even breathe normally when you're near it. As such, I went with AK's gravel fixer, which is alcohol based and has little to no surface tension. And even then, sometimes the bark tried to run away from the glue, as if it didn't want to be a part of this model. I don't know why someone would refuse such a privilege, but who am I to judge? So after the glue was dry, it was time to integrate it into the weathering with the same enamels as before. The dark muddy mixture was applied as a heavy wash, and I left the bark to soak it up. Under the previous video, there was a comment about tree sap getting absolutely everywhere on these trucks, and at first, I didn't know how I would replicate this. I didn't see any of that in references, but then I realized that all those dark, pretty much black stains and streaks all over the place must be exactly that, tree sap mixed with dirt. I applied it mainly on the log carrier and ropes, pretty much creating a color gradient ranging from the lightest dry mud tones to almost black sticky goo. So what do you say? Looks good enough? Personally, I think it does. So I decided to proceed to the final stages. I freed the model from the improvised and not entirely reliable styrofoam clamp, broke the wheels off from toothpicks, and assembled the running gear. Seeing the truck with wheels attached for the first time at this stage was like seeing Project Hail Mary on a big IMAX screen. Both were very good feelings. And I immediately saw a bit of room for improvement. Sometimes you just have to see the whole picture before you can objectively judge if the finish is missing something. Also, I dry fitted the trailer because here I wanted to add some splashes of mud thrown up by the wheels. It's these small details you either see in references or you hallucinate them if you obsess over the model long enough. Here's the mixture I use for the tree sap. I'm showing it now because I also used it to simulate muck around the fuel tank filler caps. If you're gonna stop me right now and say that's excessive, I'm gonna hit you with the reference Uno card because I wouldn't do it either if I didn't see it on the real truck. One of the final steps in every weathering process is a graphite pencil used for that polished metal look on the worn edges. On my armor models, it usually means going over everything, but here it was mainly on the trailer and the rear parts of the truck. The front is relatively spotless, remember? The general guideline is this. If there are large surfaces of exposed metal, you definitely gotta polish those with a pencil. And if there are some high traffic areas with worn down paint, then you're definitely gonna need to polish those as well, unless it's a vehicle that hasn't been used in a very long time. Finally, let's make some wet effects. I always mix those three paints together to get a glossy, dirty water of sorts. I stopped using this method for a couple of years for whatever reason. I honestly don't know why, and I missed out on so many of my models because just look at it. Even if the weathering itself is good, this gives it an extra punch. Those sharp edges, round shapes, super glossy surface, it makes the weathering look so much crispier, especially when it's based on references. And there's this awesome detail. The trailer wheels all have visible streaks of moisture, and that's the excessive cooling water that's been pumped into the brake drums on the way down. So, you know what are the real finishing touches? Taking off the small details that I painted separately and putting them on the model. I didn't hold them in place with super glue just yet, because I plan to put the model in a logging diorama on a slope, and I want these to follow gravity. What I did hold permanently with CA was the log trailer, and you wouldn't guess what was the most unnerving task at the very end. Threading this chain through the metal tube on the cab protector, and threading the hook through a chain link. I held it in place with CA as well, because it can't be too slack. And with that, my mission was finally over. I'm convinced that this is the most complex and involved scale model I've ever worked on. Probably the longest video I've done as well. From 3D printed pieces, through the extensive detailing I've added to it, to this well-used paint job, it was a lot of work. I lost sleep over it, and I mean that literally. There were a couple of nights where I couldn't fall asleep because I kept thinking about the next steps and about ways to speed things up, because I was already in that stage where I know it's been a long time since the last video and I should upload something new sooner than later. However, despite all of this, it's my favorite model. I mean, it already kinda was because it was a dream project of mine from the beginning, but seeing it finished, it's so different from anything I've done so far, and I'm really satisfied with how it turned out. Sure, there are mistakes and places that would benefit from more TLC, but all things considered, I gave it everything I had in me. So what do you think? Let me know. Next, I'm gonna make a scenic base for it and add a figure. The model needs it for context and scale comparison, but also the base will protect the fragile resin, and I won't have to touch the model with my hands ever again. Until then, thank you for all of your support, because without you, I wouldn't be here making these YouTube videos as my daily job, and I wouldn't have this Pacific P16 either. It truly means the world to me, and I mean that. And a special thanks goes to my patrons. Their help allows me to buy large bags of mulch and use it on my models, and if you're one of them, thank you so much, because if it weren't for you, I wouldn't have the privilege of building models full time. You'll get a lot of cool stuff if you join. I post regular updates, share work in progress photos, various thoughts and observations from the workbench, and we keep in touch through DMs, comments, and emails. Top tier patrons get early access to all of my videos, completely ad-free, and they stay there forever, so if you like listening to them while you're modeling, now you know where to go. There are also bonus extras like 3D printable parts for your own projects, reference photos from real-life locations, and high-res studio shots of my models that show way more detail than video ever could. Your financial support is appreciated, but never expected. I'm sorry it took me longer to finish the model. It goes against everything a YouTuber should do, but I promise the scenic base will be finished much quicker, and then we'll start working on another armor model. And remember, build your models, don't just hoard them. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers!